Glenn Jacobs is the mayor of Knox County, Tennessee. He is also known as Kane, a WWE Hall of Famer. And he's with us now, right here on The Will Kane Show. Mayor, great to have you on the show. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much, Will. I appreciate it.
So let's just start with my theory. So I haven't lived everywhere. And, of course, I'm talking to a homer, as you are the mayor of Knox County, Tennessee, which technically encompasses something much greater than Knoxville. But my theory, Mayor, is that Knoxville, Tennessee, which I think the city is somewhere around 200,000, the county is about 500,000. So I've always been under understanding that Knoxville is about 300,000, is the perfect city in America. I think cities like where I live, Dallas, are too big, and you get, you get all the convenience of a great big city and an airport, and you get a lot of the problems of a big city as well. And then I grew up in a town of 30,000 people in Texas, and that's pretty small. And the truth is, while you have a great community, you're missing some things. You got to drive maybe for a restaurant or whatever it may be. And you guys have basically the nice little Venn diagram of everything you need is there, but you still retain small town community, and to some extent, everybody knows everybody in Knoxville.
I absolutely agree. But even before COVID, we saw this migration around the country of people moving away from the big cities to the more mid-sized cities, such as us. As you said, Knoxville has about 200,000 people. The county overall has about 500,000 people. So 60% of the people actually live outside of the city limits of Knoxville. And we do have something for everyone. We have some pretty cool sections of town with the dining and entertainment. And then actually I live out in what most people would call country still. So I do believe we have something for everyone. We may not be perfect. However, if you're looking for America, you need to come to Knox County, Tennessee, because that's what we are.
What does that mean? How are you America? I mean, by the way, there's other cities in your Venn diagram. I don't know, I think Lubbock is a great city, not as pretty as Knoxville. Waco. There's some other cities in your demographic size range, but what makes you America?
We're America because the values that have made this country great. That's what we still subscribe to. Individual freedom. We're business friendly. We want people to thrive, just prosper. But we also realize that that's up to you. The government's job is not to just give people money and say everything's great because we have all these wonderful programs. It's really to help folks in the private sector achieve those things on their own. We have a great faith-based community. I really do believe that we have everything. We're really close to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park as well, which gets about 14 million people a year, which is huge. So we have a lot of tourism here. And of course, you can't forget, we have the University of Tennessee Vols football and basketball, who reached the Elite Eight for the first time ever this year. So we have a lot of great things going on.
Yeah, the fake UT there in Knoxville. The real UT, of course, in Texas.
The real UT. Come on.
but I will say,
like a true Texas
I lived. There's no hiding it. I will say I lived in Blount County there, just outside of Knoxville, for about 4 or 5 months during COVID, and I did fall in love with it. I think you have a wonderful little corner of the country there, and I'm not just saying that because you're here. I do think it might be the perfect city in America. So I'd love if you're willing to indulge it to some extent today. I would love to talk to you about WWE, but I want to talk about politics first. You're an interesting guy. I think throughout most of your life, you're a self-described libertarian, but even more than that, you I think, self-described Rothbardian, which means you've studied or appreciated Murray Rothbard, who was, again, a self-described anarcho-capitalist, which was, very minimal involvement of government in everyday life. Is that the philosophy that kind of governs you as a mayor?
That certainly governs my thought pattern. That's not the world we live in, obviously. So I have to navigate through that. But nevertheless, I mentioned before when talking about the great churches that we have here. And one of the first things I did when I came into office was I really started talking with those folks, open up communication, especially, issues that they're much better positioned to help with, such as the opioid and drug epidemic and these other things that government, we have limited tools. And often what happens is we have a hammer and we see everything as a nail. And so I try to think outside of the box in that I want to get other organizations involved as opposed to spending taxpayer money on stuff that is really not effective anyway. Say with addiction, I really believe that is a problem of the spirit. You have a hole that you're trying to fill, so you turn to drugs. Government can't solve that. But churches and faith certainly play a role. So one of my major things is trying to get the private sector and the nonprofit sector much more involved and activated, and figuring out how we can work with them better.
What I'm curious about you, and we'll bounce back and forth between your current political positions and your past, not just as a wrestler, but I'm actually curious. So I have this right. You're 7 foot tall, right?
Well, I'm about 6'8", but I'm pretty tall.
You're 6'8". Okay, build is 7 foot. But you're from Missouri. You went to Northeast Missouri State, I believe, and I believe, and you always correct the bio if I get it wrong. You played football and basketball, which, okay, a lot of wrestlers are former football players or athletes. But what really stood out to me about you, and I know Ric Flair to some extent, and you heard probably mentioned I've met The Rock. You majored in English literature, not exactly the football player's kinesiology degree. Like, there's clearly something with you that's a little 6'8" athlete, but interested in Murray Rothbard and English literature.
Yeah. It probably because I wasn't smart enough for the physiology and kinesiology classes, actually. But nevertheless, that actually translated very well into wrestling because, wrestling's all about stories. And actually, life is really about stories as well. And that's the way that you relate to people. So that degree has helped me a lot in that I think that I understand communication, how to talk with folks, how to put things into a context that makes it compelling. Too often what happens is politicians, we get out here and especially on the conservative side, and we'll spew statistics and numbers. People don't care about that. They want to know how these things impact their life. And I think because of that background that I have, that I've become pretty good at doing that and adapting that to this job.
Well, I love what you said about life is about stories, and that how your wrestling experience lends itself to the way you were educated, and now that's lending itself to politics. There's a friend of our program, Outkicks, Bobby Burak, and he's written a lot about this. He's a big fan of wrestling, and he said, look, honestly, when you boil everything down, politics, life, kind of like what you said, wrestling is kind of the purest form of entertainment of anything else that we're doing. And like politics is a form of character development. You could also argue, is there kayfabe in politics? A lot of other things, So it kind of makes you wonder, A, is that a good thing that, that so much of life emulates wrestling, or that wrestling prepares you for other forms of life? You could argue it's a bad thing. I mean, I think that was the central premise or part of a big character development in Idiocracy. But I think that if either way, good or bad, you would also kind of think maybe there'd be more guys like you taking that experience and storytelling out into a broader place of life. I don't know that it just necessarily means politics, but, in life after wrestling.
Well, you do see it, like you talk about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and everything that he's done, John Cena, what he's doing in Hollywood. People like Mick Foley and Dolph Ziggler, who have their comedy shows, and also now my half brother in wrestling, The Undertaker, who's doing his kind of one-man show. So you do see it, I believe, in different ways. And one of the things that I'm really proud of and happy about when I look back on the wrestling industry is, it used to be that we were just wrestlers, right? We were just jocks, and probably a lot of folks consider us meatheads. But now you think about people like Dwayne and people like John Cena and everything that they've done, and I think and someone said this to me today. Folks now understand you have the characters, but then you also have the people behind the characters. While we're wrestling, you kind of blur those lines a little bit. But now also with social media and the advent of all those things, and you see that the stories behind the characters are really compelling. And that's one thing that WWE has done very, very well, is delving into the people behind the characters. And as a wrestling fan myself, it's kind of hard because we pull back the curtain now, right? And it used to be We didn't talk about any of those things, and now we pull back the curtain so people can see that. But I think going forward, you will probably see more folks in wrestling that get into other areas because of the ability and the platform that wrestling gave them.
And if we're right, it's a really good platform to do so, and because it puts you on the public map in how about this? In an underratedly big way. I don't think people appreciate how big wrestling is. But then B, do you agree? I mean, like, well, wrestling is kind of the heart of all entertainment. I mean, it is a distilled, I don't want to call it simplified, but you know, it is, you know, babyface and heel. It's stories, it's a fight. And that's kind of, in the end, how a lot of people view the prism of the world.
Yeah, it's live action Shakespeare is what it is. It's good versus evil, you know. And one of the great blessings that I've come to realize about my career is, and I've had lots of folks tell me this, they might be going through a hard time in their life, and they're able to escape from that through wrestling. And as you said, it is simplified, obviously, but nevertheless, it is that struggle between good versus evil, between overcoming or submitting to whatever challenges you're facing. So I think you're exactly right. And again, you know, that's one of the great blessings now that I realize that form of entertainment really does add value to people's lives in ways that I never thought that it did.
But is that, if it is the essence of entertainment, and it might be even the essence of how people see politics, Mayor, is that a good thing? Like, you know, is it as simple as good versus evil? And I think that definitely does exist in the world, right? But sure. Is that is it a good thing that that's become how we also view almost every element of politics? You know, those that disagree or those who are on a different political party or whatever it may be, we see through the same prism.
Right. If people could see behind the scenes, you know, they'd realize that this is a team effort. Everything in WWE requires everything from the performers in the ring who are working together to put on a great performance, to the camera people who are getting the right shots, to the production people who are putting all this stuff together and making a very slick package that looks great on TV. So ultimately, probably the thing that we're leaving out is what goes on behind the scenes, and it's all the teamwork and camaraderie that goes into it. You know, so you have those two different aspects of it. And so much of it also.
Wait. Are you making a parallel to politics there? Are you saying that on the surface of politics, there's a lot of fighting, but beneath the surface, it requires teamwork? No, okay.
No, and in some cases, you know, and unfortunately, and we saw this, say, with Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, you know, who had very serious disagreements on policy, but they could still work together on some things. They could still get along, you know, behind the scenes. And there's nothing wrong with that. And of course, nowadays, there's so much vitriol everywhere that, you know, none of us can work together. I was telling someone one day, you know, they were talking about reaching across the aisle. I was like, man, you try to reach across the aisle in the current environment, you're going to pull back a stump. I mean, you know, you're just going to get attacked. And that's very unfortunate, because there are things that we could all probably look at and say, okay, we do have some common ground here. But, you know, there are also some extreme elements that literally want to stop that from happening because they lose their influence.
I don't think anything I want to ask you today completely leaves behind the theme of both wrestling and politics. I think they're intertwined, interestingly, in your life, in perhaps society, but also in this interview. And so I also hope you just talked about pulling back the curtain. And I'm going to be honest with you, I've been a wrestling fan at various levels, and you probably heard me say I'm going to go to WrestleMania this weekend. Yeah. But I probably don't know all of the etiquette of an interview, so all I'll do is I'll ask, and you can tell me how you feel about it. But you talked about pulling back the curtain and the character and the person behind the character. As I mentioned, I'm from Texas, and I'm 40. I'm now 49 years old. So I grew up in a wrestling that was pre-WWE. Like when I was a kid, I was a fan, but it was regional wrestling promotions, right? And the biggest stars in the world to me were the Von Erichs. And I was watching Iron Claw, and then I watched a documentary about the Von Erichs recently, and they were talking about Fritz, the patriarch of the whole thing. Early in the 60s, he played a career, and he was a heel, and he wanted to be the most evil thing you could think of, or he along in a character developer, or producer, or promoter. And so he was a Nazi, you know, and that's what the name Fritz Von Erich was. And, you know, you played Kane, and, you know, or you are Kane, and it's, you know, hellfire and brimstone. And I do kind of wonder, even in the documentary I saw, Kevin Von Erich was kind of like a little bit like, he was a Nazi, you know? And I do wonder, when the character becomes so much of your persona and who you are, if you kind of struggle with that, I wish that I wasn't publicly seen as a certain thing that might be disconnected from the values of me as a person.
That's a great question. And certainly Kane and Glenn Jacobs are two very different individuals, right? For me, I've always been very grounded and understand that that was just my job. Okay. And was able to create a great character, but still, that was my job. It never defined me. And thinking about it in that respect, I've always been able to keep that separate. And I don't worry.
Mm-hmm.
I have the same thing as Mayor, actually. I don't worry about what all these folks are saying because they don't know me. They've never met me. They've never talked to me. The people that I worry about are the people who are close to me, my family and my very close friends, and ensuring that, the Glenn Jacobs that they know is a good guy, right? So.
Well, not hellfire and brimstone.
Yeah, seriously. So I've never really worried about that because I understand that I am playing a character, and it's just like, I love Silence of the Lambs, but I also realize that Anthony Hopkins is not Hannibal Lecter. Okay. But I appreciate his ability in that character. So that's something that, at times I have, because it's like, oh man, I want to be like John Cena where everybody loves me, right? But that was never my role, and that's fine because I'm comfortable in my own skin.
Might be easier to get elected, right? If you were a baby, I know you were at times a face and other times, but primarily a heel. Yeah. I think imagine if you were John Cena and constantly the good guy, it might be easier to get elected.
It might be, but at the end of the day, all wrestling did for me in that respect, the Kane persona, it really opened the door, right? I was a novelty, so people wanted to talk to me. I could get on the news and those sort of things. But at the end of the day, I also had to be able to put a sentence together to be able to talk coherently about policy and those sort of things. So I think this idea that celebrities get elected because people, they're still related to the celebrity, I think that's a little overrated. It might be true in some cases, but in mine, again, I could kind of open the door with that, but if I couldn't walk through on my own, I was going to be in a lot of trouble.
Well, staying on wrestling for a minute, Ric Flair said you're the best in the world. Big Show said you're the best big man ever. You're in the WWE Hall of Fame. You're an incredible, not just big man, but athlete. That's something that I talked about in Iron Claw and in the documentary, that this is an athletic sport. By the way, just to tie a ribbon on that, did you ever know, you came along a little after them, it seems like, did you ever know the Von Erichs?
I did not, actually. I worked a lot with Michael Hayes, who was one of the Freebirds. That was their big rivalry back in the day, but that was before my time.
I'm taking my sons and my wife, for that matter. I've never been to WrestleMania. Any advice? Anything I should look for in particular? Any best way to enjoy WrestleMania?
It's a great show, and there's just so much stuff to do, not only with the WrestleMania show itself, but also the convention, the fan access that WWE puts on. So there's a lot of really cool stuff, opportunities to meet some of the guys and some of the gals. So I would just soak the whole thing in.
We're going to talk about it later in the show. When I had a ESPN radio show, my audience was called the Willisha, and I was looking at your fans, and I could have done this, but you already took them. Canaanites. It's really good. It's really good. Might be better than Willisha.
Not bad, right? They'd have to spell it different, but it'd still be okay.
Let's go back to politics for just a moment now. It's interesting. Let's go back to this idea of storytelling and salesmanship. That's what comes so naturally based upon your career. That's what you've practiced. And I want to, as I mentioned, I spent some time there in Eastern Tennessee, and I asked some people, and I heard two things. First of all, one of the things I heard, I'm sure you won't mind hearing some of this feedback. Somebody said, interestingly, he's smart, needs to work on his salesmanship because of the advanced Knox infrastructure plan got scuttled by 3 aldermen. I don't know. We don't want to get into necessarily local politics, but I am curious because the thing about libertarianism often, and I don't know if that's how you would still describe yourself, is it's principled to the point of ostracizing reality and people. That's been, I have flirted myself with libertarianism, and it loses practicality and its ability to do what you said earlier, Mayor, which is tell stories and connect with human beings. You did an awesome thing during COVID where you opposed the mask mandate, said it didn't make sense, blunt instrument. But I'm curious, is this piece of feedback incorrect? How is this still something you're learning in politics, or I don't know? Like, talk to me about salesmanship versus principles as you're applying it there at the local level in Knox County.
Sure. Again, it goes back to, we can talk about statistics and we can talk about numbers, but people really want to know how policies impact their lives. And the biggest issue that we have is really the short-term benefits of a program versus our policy versus the long-term detriments of the program and the unintended consequences. This is something that Frederick Bastiat, the great French economist and statesman, talked about. And too often the sales pitch is the short term. This is great. We're going to spend a bunch of money, go into debt, and we're going to give people something. What they don't talk about is, we're going to spend a bunch of money going to debt, and you're going to have to pay for that, or your kids are going to have to pay for that. And there's going to be all these unintended consequences. So part of my job is to really illustrate, when we're making decisions, it's not only about the short term, it's not only about the easy stuff. It's about what happens over the long term. Our country's $35 trillion in debt. No one's really talking about that. I mean, because we've gotten all this free stuff over the years. Well, that bill's coming due. And that's just kind of one of the issues with politics, is the fact that it's easier to sell the big government programs because people say, oh, I'm going to get something, as opposed to realizing that the price tag, which is often hidden, is massive. And of course, with the situation you were just talking about now, there's always politics involved. So you can show people the best benefits in the world while you're doing something, and sometimes it's just not going to happen, unfortunately. But I truly believe, as you said, it's about clear communication and about putting it in terms that everyone can relate to, as opposed to being, and I struggle with that sometimes, because my communications people will tell me, don't use this word because it's too wonkish and things like that. And that's true for conservatives too. We all of us, and I would consider myself, in that camp, in both camps really, all of us have to be able to, I don't want to say sell, but all of us have to be able to articulate our positions and why we do things better, and understand that it's not just about the short-term stuff, but it's also about the long-term stuff, which is going to have very destructive consequences.
And connect emotionally. And I think that's the pathway of stories, is to connect emotionally.
Exactly. Yeah, because most people think, that's how most folks think, which we're human beings. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not good or bad. It just is. It's the real world. And Kane is throwing down Bastiat. I know he's a big Von Mises fan, and Rothbard, and his people have told him he's too wonkish. That's pretty freaking awesome for WWE. So here's the compliment on the other side. I've been told that you are a likely future governor of Tennessee.
They've been talking about that and thinking about what my future holds. I am term limited, so on September 1st, 2026, I can no longer be Knox County mayor. I can't run for re-election. And, kind of thinking about what the future holds. I don't know what path I'm going to go down at this point. So much of it really depends on family, but also where you think you'd be a best fit, where you could serve the best. And I'm still considering all those things. But thank you for a wonderful compliment.
Well, so you are considering, though. You're debating it. You're weighing it. You are considering really, running for governor.
At this point, kind of everything, everything's open. So thinking about that. I'm also sometimes thinking about maybe I'm just going to go fishing at some point. So we'll see.
Well, let me ask you, while I won't press you on whether or not you want to run for governor anymore, I also won't press you on if you want to run for president of the United States one day. But I would ask you this, and I am genuinely interested. Were you president, what would you make your top priority for America? Like, you've talked about the debt, you talked about the deficit. I know you're a fan of Ron Paul. I know many guys who like Ron Paul are extremely concerned about the Federal Reserve. So if you were president, what would you do? What's your top priority?
The first thing I'd do is I'd actually repeal a withholding tax. We have to understand the president should have limited powers. Really should be Congress making a lot of these decisions, but nevertheless, that's where we're at. That'd be the first thing, because I think once folks realize that when they get a refund back from the IRS, it's not really a refund, they've already paid into it. And I think that a lot of folks would pay, if you actually had to write a check to the IRS, everybody around the country, you would probably pay a lot closer attention to how the federal government is spending, in many cases, wasting all this money. And you just have to look at the budget, and it's not even a scalpel anymore. You got to go through it with a chainsaw. Unfortunately, so much of the spending is baked in at this point. Congress actually has very little discretionary authority because of the things like the Social Security and Medicare, and how to make those viable for the long term. That's a big issue as well. And then also look at things like Obamacare. And when we think about how expensive healthcare is getting, it's funny because the more government gets involved, the higher prices get, and that's very difficult on everyone. So how do you literally get rid of Obamacare, but do it in a way that is palatable and doesn't cause huge dislocations within the market? At some point, I'm afraid that with the massive amount of spending and debt, a lot of these problems are going to be solved for us in a way that we don't want. So I don't know if there's even time to get ahead of it at this point, again, with $35 trillion in national debt. But nevertheless, those are the things that I do, is really cut spending and try to address the debt.
Well, you're spot on withholding, Mayor. I mean, it doesn't have a pain point for any American, and therefore the spending doesn't matter. If you have to write a check and you have to save for it, and then you have to send it in once a year, it would have an entirely different relationship with the government, as opposed to it just being absent-mindedly withheld from your paycheck. And we all just kind of adjust our standard of living to be about, whatever it is, 25% of your total salary. 75%, 25% withheld from your total salary, whatever everyone's bracket might be. I totally agree with you. Just the proactive act of having to save and write a check would change the calculus for America. Last thing, Donald Trump. Tell me about your relationship with Donald Trump. I think any future political office right now, that's an extremely important endorsement. I would imagine you have a relationship with him to some extent going back to the WWE.
Yeah, he was obviously he helped promote some early WrestleManias. He was in a WrestleMania. I think I might have shook his hand. I can't remember. It was kind
is that all? Okay.
Passing, right. And also, obviously, at that time, he was a celebrity, but he wasn't president of the United States. But afterwards, I have gotten to know him a little bit. I've met with him in private. He is very friendly, and very cordial. And what's happening to him now with all these indictments and everything? Look, even if you hate Donald Trump, you have got to be alarmed by this lawfare that is taking place. And all these defenders of democracy, and literally, they will say it out loud now that all these things are simply designed to keep Donald Trump out of the White House. Well, how is that a democratic process? So I have just massive respect. Look, if they were doing that to me, I'd be like, Mar-a-Lago's really nice this time of year. I think I'm going to retire there. Instead, you have Donald Trump punching back and fighting as hard as he can, and that deserves everyone's respect.
All right, Mayor Glenn Jacobs, also known as Kane. What an awesome conversation about, I don't know if we're talking about two separate worlds, wrestling and politics here on The Will Kane Show. Thank you so much, Mayor. Best of luck there in Knox County, Tennessee.
Thanks, Will. I appreciate it. Have a good day.